right, it should be good to go.
Good morning, I'm Dr. Tony McGarrahan, and I am a forensic psychologist and neuropsychologist. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that as we go. I've been in practice now for 21 years, and I've brought Dr. Galusha on to assist me, and she'll talk about what she does. And we have Eva Baker, an intern who's a graduate student at UT Southwestern, studying to be a psychologist, their PhD program there. Just very basically, does anybody know what a forensic psychologist does?
Oh
no, you lost your brain.
Yeah, I did, but I don't know. I think my sister wanted to be one. I don't want to sound stupid.
You're not gonna sound stupid. What do you think?
Okay, forensic. So I don't know. It's something like with crime,
Right.
for sure. Oh, like you're a psychologist, but for maybe like
Criminals? Yes, so,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, I'm not sure.
Okay, it's okay.
But going on like inferences, I guess. I would guess someone who investigates, like, well, the crime happens, and then you probably take in the mindset of the people who were in the crime.
Exactly. So you both are right on. So we're trained as psychologists, have a doctorate in psychology, and then just like physicians or doctors do, right? They're not just a general doctor, they go and they do their specialty. We have our areas of specialty, and forensic psychology is really taking what we know as psychologists and applying it to a legal question. And most notably, people think about in the criminal courts, because that's the really fun and exciting and sexy part of what we do, because it's exactly what we do is we go in and we talk to individuals who are accused of committing crimes, and usually very serious crimes. There's not a lot of questions about misdemeanors and why people engage in those, but so the violent felonies, the sexual offenses, and then murder and capital murder. And so we talk to the individual in jails and prisons and find out about them. Sometimes there's a question about why did they commit this crime? Were they insane at the time of the crime, right? Were they so crazy that they didn't know what they were doing was wrong? And as part of our legal system, should we acquit them because of their mental illness? We might determine if somebody's competent to stand trial. They're headed to trial, they're headed to, they're charged with capital murder, they're facing the death penalty, and you have the right to be competent in order to assist your attorney and understand what's happening to you. So we did make that determination. So as part of that, we interview the individuals, we review records, we talk to family members, and then we do lots of testing. And the testing is part of the psychologist in us and part of the neuropsychologist. And maybe you can talk a little bit about the neuropsychology and some of the testing that we do with these individuals. But we're in the criminal arena, and then we also do civil work. That's kind of the less sexy, fun side of what we do, but if somebody is suing somebody else because of a traumatic brain injury or PTSD from, let's say, a car accident, and they're seeking emotional damages, we will evaluate that individual and determine, do they have mental health problems because of this accident? Do they have indications of a traumatic brain injury? And we provide that information to a court, usually a judge or a jury. There's other stuff we do. We do some pro bono asylum work, so we'll do a psychological evaluation of somebody seeking asylum in the United States if they were persecuted in their home country for their religion or their political beliefs, or what have you. So those are the primary areas where we provide information from a psychological standpoint to a court. We do not do any family law work. That usually involves child custody and the best interest of a child. And it's also the area that has the highest amount of lawsuits against psychologists who do those evaluations, and the highest number of licensing board complaints. So people filing complaints to our licensing board. We want nothing to do with that. So we leave that up to the folks. There are folks, forensic psychologists, who do child custody evaluations and work in the family courts, and we can certainly, if anybody has an interest in that, we can direct you to psychologists who do that, but we don't do that kind of work. So just criminal and civil and some asylum work. You can talk about the neuropsychology.
Yeah, and then also just my trajectory to getting into psychology. So when I first started college at your age, actually I was still a little bit older, but I was actually an engineering major. I'm a huge math science person. From there, I became a police officer, and that was my first career. I left law enforcement, super male dominated, so much misogyny, I can't even begin to explain it to you. And then I found myself studying psychology and specializing in neuropsychology and forensic psychology. I also still consult with law enforcement, and Dr. McGarrihan does as well. We consult on mental health, wellness, and resiliency in police officers and first responders, and we provide consultation to several of the local agencies in Dallas. Yes. I was trying to stay. I like to move around. I have a hard time just sitting still. So anyway, like I said, we do a variety of different things. One of the cool things about forensic psychology is that it's not just one piece, right? So it's actually a pretty broad subspecialty of psychology. You might have somebody who's a forensic psychologist and all they do is work with sex offenders. They do sex offender treatment, they do sexual violence risk assessment. You have some that work strictly in family law. We know one psychologist who specialized in listening and evaluating outcries from people and speaking to the veracity or the truthfulness of that outcry. So forensic psychology is still pretty broad. Within neuropsychology specifically centers on brain and behavior relationships. So anytime you ever have an insult to the brain, be it a concussion, or as people get older, they have strokes, heart attacks, things like that, that can impact your thinking. And so the tests that we do get at how well is somebody thinking? How well can they process information, their language abilities, how do they perceive information in their environment, can they use that information, problem solving, their attention, all of these different facets that make up thinking. That's what our tests get at. And it's really, really important, especially in the case of capital crimes where the death penalty is on the table, that that individual has an intellectual evaluation because if you didn't know, it's against, there was a Supreme Court ruling, I don't remember the year, Atkins, that determined that we can't put people to death if they're intellectually disabled. So if we go in and do an evaluation, we determine that they are intellectually disabled, immediately the death penalty is off the table. So that's part of why we see so many people who've been charged with capital crimes. So I'm going to put the spotlight on our intern, who I just told she was going to get to come with us. But so Eva went to college, started in Hawaii. Where did you go finish?
New Jersey.
In New Jersey, and then got into the doctorate program at UT Southwestern Medical Center. And then she came to do an internship with us. This is our very first year having an internship at our practice with Dr. McGarrihan and I. And we're all female. So it's Dr. McGarrihan, me, our female intern, and then our assistants are all women. So it's a fully owned women business, or fully owned and operated female business. But what's it been like as an intern?
Oh man.
And through the prep program and
Yeah, so I majored in psychology in undergrad. I kind of always knew that I liked learning about the brain and behavior and kind of just wanted to know more about it. And I think I also grew up on Criminal Minds, and I was like, I think that looks kind of cool, which isn't what we do, but that's how I got into it. And then the more I learned about it, the more I got excited about it. And especially in the research realm, why I fell in love with forensic psychology was kind of understanding how our research can impact public policy. So in terms of, I'm kind of an abolitionist, so part of the reason I like forensic psychology is because I want to learn as much about it and to figure out what's wrong. And so I love that research can kind of impact policy on a broader scale. And so that's what I wanted to do. Grad school is hard, but it's good. I've gotten a lot of great experiences. At first, I worked at the Juvenile Detention Center in Dallas, and just being able to hang out with kids and get to know them, and I was doing treatment as well as assessment, and I thought that was pretty impactful of just trying to understand what these kids were going through, but also be somebody they could kind of have a good relationship with psychology with, because oftentimes, especially the majority of the clients we see are minorities, and there's a huge mental health stigma in that community. And so just being able to be kind of a positive experience for them. And I think that was impactful for me, but also for them. And then working with these guys, I mean, as soon as I met them, I was like, you guys need to have an internship site for me. And I've
We
just
didn't
been,
have one.
No.
We didn't
Yeah,
have
no,
one.
no, we didn't.
Until Eva came along.
And she pitched it really well.
I did.
Um,
I made a whole presentation. And it's just amazing to be able to learn from really smart people who push me but support me, try to do whatever it is they can to help me. And it's awesome. I mean, we get to hang out with each other and see really cool, complex cases. It's hard mentally and emotionally just to be immersed in the justice system because it's not very just. And so just balancing what we know research-wise, knowing what's right and wrong versus just being with people. So it's incredibly complex and amazing, and I've loved it so far.
Hands down the best job you could ever have. I mean, not that I am biased, but one of the coolest aspects about being in forensic psychology, at least for me, and I know Dr. McGarry and I have kind of shared this, is that you get to go and hear somebody's story. So when you see somebody in the news and you're like, oh my gosh, this person was arrested, they killed 2 people, what a horrible human, that's typically where people's brains go. And I get it, when I was a police officer, I was very justice-minded, right? I'm like, put them under the jail. Clearly they don't need to be out. But now I get the benefit of sitting down and I hear their stories. And that's incredibly powerful. I get to we have an opportunity to somewhat be a voice for people who can't have a voice. And a lot of the time you find out these are people who've been very traumatized. I had a case recently where this young man had been abused. His mom was addicted to drugs. She had abandoned him at 9 years old in an apartment by himself for a month. So for 1 month, he was in an apartment. He had no food, he had no water, he had no utilities. He would go out at night and, shoplift from stores, whatever, beg from people he knew in the apartment complex to get food. That was at 9. One of the most impactful moments of his life that he remembered was somebody robbing his mom and seeing that this person had a gun, and that's how he got his needs met. So is it that big of a shocker that as he got older, he also engaged in robbery to get his needs met? But we were able to tell that story to the judge in a way that was very powerful. He was facing quite a bit of time. He got 10 years. That seems like a lot, but he was facing like 50, 60. And so that, to me, is probably I think it's one of the coolest aspects of our job, that we have that opportunity to go hear that story and learn, how did this individual go from point A to point B, right? None of us are born bad or evil. At least I'm not convinced we are. But there's a path. Something happens in the interim between the time of birth and the time that crime is committed. And so we get to take all this research and all this training we've had and integrate all of that in with this person and then be able to tell that story to a court. At the end of the day, we have no skin in the game. So we're not on, quote unquote, anybody's side. We're there to speak as an expert witness. And we have to stick to the science and stick to the data, despite how we might feel internally. This young man, he was somebody who was like, he was crying as he talked to me. Big guy, probably twice my size, super muscular and fit, probably he was 20. And he's just bawling as he relates to me, not only his own trauma, but also how bad he felt for traumatizing somebody else. But if all you saw was what he did and that he ran from the police, he even got bit by a canine. You have a different mental image than that individual who was sitting in front of me. So,
We know there are questions.
or at least we hope.
Yeah,
Well, and actually one thing that I touched a little bit on with them, because they know my bias in terms of bringing together the STEM and the human services side. And I know it's in the criminal justice system also, but telling their stories, which is important. And there's a couple of I read a book this summer, but there's a couple of books now out that talk about the algorithms that we've built in terms of who gets financing, who gets loans, also through the criminal justice system as to how we determine sentences and things like that are inherently racial, inherently biased.
Right.
And how when we just rely on that one objective algorithm that's supposed to be objective, it's math, right? 2 + 2 = 4, but not having the context of what that's affecting, then we're perpetuating these problems. And that's where the sciences working on the side with the actual human services side can come together to put the whole picture together.
Right, and we can ultimately, just like Eva was talking about with changing policy, right?
Right.
We can have a tremendous impact. We do violence risk assessment and also sexual violence risk assessment. These things are based on algorithms, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, there are some things where you get to have a little more clinical judgment. So one form, it's called the static, right? It is literally a checklist. Have they ever had a relationship that lasted 2 years? They get a point or lose a point. How old are they? They get X number of points for their age, or they subtract X number of points for their age. But it is completely quantitative. There's really no subjectivity involved at all. But then we have other measures where there is a little bit of subjectivity, but there are research-derived risk factors. So there are things that are related to somebody having a higher risk. Things like your age. So if you're young, less than 25, your brain is not fully developed, contrary to what we all want to think and what I thought at your age. But your brain really isn't fully developed, and it won't be until you're 25. So that's a risk factor, just being younger than 25. How many of you pay your own car insurance? At least is it expensive? My 17-year-old currently $225 a month. That's going to get incrementally better, but why is it so high? Because we know that age group takes more risk, they're more impulsive, get around your friends, they're even more impulsive and take more risks. So that's why age in and of itself, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of race, that is a risk factor. Substance use, somebody who's addicted to a substance, that's a risk factor. And it of course depends on what you're talking about, sexual violence or a violence risk, but that is where it is. It's algorithms, it's all quantitative.
That's the algorithms, yeah.
And sentencing, as much as we want to think that there's all this science behind sentencing, like at the end of the day, it's a jury making that choice. We can only speak to what we can talk about, right? I've got to follow the science, I've got to follow the data, but at the end of the day, the jury's going to make a decision, or the judge will. I've seen attorneys present some very compelling cases and think to myself, oh, the judge surely will go down on this sentence. No, he went up. No rhyme or reason, doesn't make any sense to me at all. So it's kind of interesting. I once upon a time had this thought that there was all justice, and it's really not quite so black and white.
So, y'all also work at Southwest Medical?
We're on
We're
faculty.
faculty.
You're on
Right.
faculty at Southwest.
Yeah.
And she's
Southwest.
working student.
Oh, okay. I get confused, it's such a big entity down there, so.
It's huge.
It is, and we still do some research with them, but then I also do some first responder research. I mean,
Yeah.
we're kind of all over the place.
All over the place. And again, that's what's fun now about where we can go with STEM, human services or whatever.
Right.
We can be all over, I mean, who knew it's social worker and robots? We can be all over the place.
And my biostatistician for my dissertation's a woman,
Mhm.
and she's really, like, if I ever have a stats question like Dr. Heinen, like, I don't know
Yeah.
what to do here.
Yeah.
And then several of the doctors, like psychology is not as male dominated, or is not male dominated now, it's pretty female dominated, but there are certain subspecialties that are still male dominated, forensic being one of them, and then also neuropsychology. Although that tide, I think, is starting to shift a little bit.
But you'll still see positions of power being held by white men,
Yeah.
even though it's a female dominated field. So that's nice.
Yeah,
Yes.
and we do see that in other areas too. Public health, HHB, Dr. Victoria talked about that too.
Yeah.
And then from NSF, psychology is one of the social sciences I think that they do accept as more one of the hard sciences.
Yeah, and I find that interesting that psychology is still somewhat viewed as a soft science. Neuropsychology is very biomedical. It is very quantitative. I would argue with anybody that is a hard science. And I think psychology is too. If somebody's doing things that are evidence-based and research-derived, they're going off the science. It's not, we don't put people on couches anymore and ask them what they dream about. Those days are long gone.
Some people do.
Okay, reputable people don't. Put it that way.
Questions, thoughts? Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question. Okay, so I know like this is probably not how it like really is, but I watch a lot of Chicago Med, and there's like psychology in it, and like what kind of like how does that work?
So like psychology, I assume they're in a hospital?
Yeah.
Health psychology, right?
Yeah, okay, so I go to the medical center, so a lot of my classmates are in health psych, which is what we would call that, so they're stationed like within the hospital. So psychologists can have a lot of roles, so like organ transplants, things like that. A lot of people will go through a psychological evaluation first to make sure that they're ready for the organ transplant. There's people on burn units, things like that, to help with whatever these people are going through. But basically, like, so you have doctors, right, so MDs, and then you also have psychiatrists who are psychology, but like the MD field. So they get a lot of training on like medicine and biology and things like that, but we have more of the experience of like behavior and kind of putting it all together.
Yeah.
So oftentimes we work together in teams. So that's what you'll see a lot in hospitals is like teams of people working together, and they really value psychology's input because like she said, like, you know, so a lot of it's like this biological, you know, part, but so much of what we know about life is not just in your genetics, right? It's like the experiences you have, how that impacts you. You know, two people can experience the same trauma and end up differently, right? So that's kind of more what we kind of bring to the table. Does that answer your
Yeah,
question?
thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, no worries.
Other questions?
Oh, I feel like I got a lot.
That's fine, go for it.
Okay, I'm gonna try to start from the beginning. You said something about, wait, no, I don't want to start there.
Start wherever you want.
Okay, I guess I'll start there because I can't remember the question. So you say you started as a police officer. I mean, what, if you don't mind, certain things, like what would happen in such a male-dominated field that really led you to go away from that?
So, I am not a large individual, if you can
Yeah.
tell. I'm not very tall, I don't weigh a lot. I was actually smaller then. I might have weighed 110 pounds soaking wet. So there was always that, had to prove my, you know, there was this expectation like, oh, you won't be able to fight somebody, you won't be able to hold your own, and it didn't matter what I did. Successfully held my own. I mean, I did have a significant injury when I was a police officer and had to have surgery on my knee, but that's not like I ever had to shoot anybody or anything like that. You know, I did a really good job of playing verbal judo with people so that I didn't have physical encounters. Some of that was kind of looked down on because it was like a rite of passage to get into fights. I got hit because I love to learn. That's part of the reason why I have a doctorate. And so you do patrol, and the majority of patrol, regardless of what we see on TV, is seriously it's sitting in your car and you're bored out of your mind. You know, it's like 1% excitement and 99% paperwork and sheer boredom. I don't like to be bored, so I learned how to write warrants. I learned how to fingerprint. I learned how to photograph crime scenes, just for my own personal edification. That was a hit. You know, I got hit on for that. And what it came down to is males who were very threatened. I was the first female hired in 14 years. I was 22 years old when I became a police officer. I was the second female there. And the other one was 50 years old. So you can kind of appreciate the culture shock to the agency when I went to work there. And I didn't have any support. So it wasn't like this other female was like, here, let me help you navigate this. It was like, you're on your own, have fun. And bad things happen and you complain. It's like, well, that's just the way it is. You're in the boys, you know, playground, so you've got to deal with it. Example, my hair. I had my hair cut short at that time, and I wanted to grow it out. I wasn't able to grow my hair out until I was pregnant with my daughter and I was off the streets because it couldn't touch my collar. So it was like, you know, that in-between stage, I know you've been there, right? Where you can't put it in a ponytail and you can't, and I mean, so it was things like that. It was always having to operate within that environment. Mental health was very much, if something bothered you, you're a wimp. You don't belong in law enforcement. Like, you know, if it bothers you, that's clearly not the job for you. That's why one of my kind of side projects and something I'm very passionate about is lessening the stigma for our first responders for mental health. More officers died by suicide 2 years ago than in felonious encounters with suspects. That's a problem, but we don't talk about it. So that's part of the impetus for me doing this mental health, wellness, and resiliency training with police officers, is just to help lessen that stigma, because it is a hard job, right? It's traumatic. There's nothing about being a police officer that's easy, and it makes me sad that it's not recognized. The last funeral that I did when I was on honor guard, so like 21 gun salute, fold the flag, carry the casket, that stuff. The guy drank himself to death. He drank himself to death because of trauma. It wasn't because he was a horrible person, but he had been an officer and then he went overseas. Then he came back and it just became too much. And so that was, once I got into psychology, that became kind of a passion of mine to help improve that, and at least to see that no officer ever feels like they're alone. So, also my dissertation project was with law enforcement. Another aspect of forensic psychology, again, this is not anything Dr. McGarrihan and I do, is law enforcement pre-employment evaluations. So in order to be a police officer in the state of Texas, you have to go through a psychological evaluation. Eva's done multiple of those when she worked at a different practice for her first year of internship. And my whole Dr. McGarrihan and I did this research together, and we had another police officer who was on my dissertation committee, who's a criminologist. And our premise is that the psychological evaluation doesn't do a good job of selecting police officers. It's outdated. We need to do better. And so we instituted cognitive testing and markers of emotional health. So kind of some interesting research, and again, just collaborating with police. I like that psychology, you can bridge a lot of gaps with it. So one of the cooler parts of the job, I think.
So your educational trajectory, what kind of classes did you have to take?
So I did a Bachelor of Science, so I took a lot of extra math and science that you don't necessarily have to have. Like I took chemistry, I took all the way up through calculus, but then abnormal psychology, the history of psychology. It's always important to kind of know where we've been and know where we are now. A lot of stuff on brains, so behavioral neuroscience. I've taken a couple of psychopharmacology classes. I'm very interested in medication, although we cannot prescribe in the state of Texas. I still think it's important to understand what it's doing as far as how it acts in the brain, and then also side effects associated with that. Same thing with substances. I think it's important to understand. We've seen people who used meth 2 years prior and they're still psychotic from it. Meth is a dirty, nasty, nasty drug. People will literally go psychotic and then they are never the same ever again. And so it's important to have all of that knowledge. So I did a lot more science in addition to the standard psychology. But abnormal, physiological psychology, stats. Gotta have some stats classes. I love that stuff. What am I missing?
I was pre-med,
Oh, there you go.
but then all the science classes were at 7 a.m. and I just wasn't built for that. So then I went to psychology.
So, and they usually don't start before 9, to be fair. I never had anybody with a,
Ours were 7, and I was like, I'm not. It's not
no,
me.
in psychology, they were
Oh,
never.
yeah,
How many
so-
years of internship do you have left, or do you have to do?
So for undergrad, 4 years, right? And then I went straight into my doctorate program, which is more rare, I would say.
Yeah.
Most people come in with a master's already, or at least they have graduated and worked for like a couple years to get more experience. And then UT Southwestern is a 4-year program, which is very short. Most programs are about 5 to 6 years. I would say 5 is probably average, and then you do a year of internship. UT Southwestern is unique because it's a 4-year program and you do 2 different internships. So like she said, last year I was at a different private practice, mostly doing pre-employment evals. And then I'm with them and I graduate in August with my doctorate.
So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
There's,
Okay.
and then one more year of supervised work.
Yeah,
Right.
and so then next year, so medical doctors have like a residency where they kind of specialize. We have a postdoc. So next year I'll be doing my postdoc where I'll do like forensic psychology, and that'll be like when I specialize. So
So-
9 years.
You got quick? Go ahead. Oh, that's me.
So like for like you were talking about how like you have worked with people who have been on drugs and like years later they have. Do y'all get people who are like when they are on drugs you have to evaluate them?
No, and typically if they haven't cleared from those drugs, like if this is a long-term substance use user, we'll tell the attorneys and barring something emergent, which is very rare for us anyway, like a comp eval you would have to do sooner. But like a neuropsychological evaluation, I'm gonna tell the attorney, hey, we need to let them clear up. Like let that brain clear, let them be sober for a while, and then we'll go do it. Because I wanna get the best performance they can give me. And someone who is still intoxicated or withdrawing from drugs, they can't give that.
They're in jail for a little while before we see them, so we
Yeah.
try to detox them first, yeah.
Part of the rotation that we have to do as students is at Parkland Emergency. And so at that time, yes, we see them
That's the issue.
immediately. And you can read about stuff, right? Like you'll read about diagnoses, whatever. You can read about substance use. You can see it on TV, but it's a different experience seeing it and actually like what it looks like and what they go through and just kind of understanding like, wow, like that's what that looks like, and it's pretty intense. So we do get exposure to that at the emergency room. And again, we work with doctors, social workers. So it's a social worker, a doctor, and us. So we go into the room and we talk to them. Sometimes they don't want to talk, sometimes we're talking, but things don't necessarily make sense. But yeah, we do get exposure to that.
Good.
Okay.
You're next.
Nikki? Or-
No, go ahead. I can't. Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious, how do people get to y'all? Because like if they say, I didn't do it, or something like that, or like, like what steps do they have to go through to be able to be, I guess, evaluated by
Their lawyer usually will contact us. They'll sense something's not right, or the family member will say, we think there are mental health problems, and so the attorney will usually call us, or the courts will call us. We'll get an order that tells us we need to go evaluate somebody to determine if they're competent to stand trial, and the judges send those orders usually on the request of their attorney. Sometimes if we're working for the state or the prosecution, we're called in because the defense is gonna offer some sort of evidence of mental illness or mental health problems, and the state needs to have their own expert, right? Like you always see that on TV where there's the battle of the experts. So usually there's one on each side.
And when I was at the juvenile detention center, almost every kid, I would say like 92% of them, had to have a psychological evaluation. So we were stationed like above them, so we would just come down and do them. So almost every kid would, if they're detained, regardless, like they haven't actually been, they plead true or not true. They don't plead guilty when they're kids. But I would see them before they've even been sentenced or anything like that, or adjudicated. So with the kiddos, if you're in a detention center, or you could be in like in a Bureau of Prisons, like you would just be in the facility. So it kind of just depends if it's mandated or not. Does that answer your question?
Okay, so like in court, like when they're trying to decide like if they're guilty or not, they can plead like that they have a mental health issue. So when they do that, do y'all have to do an evaluation for them to be able to get
With respect to like insanity,
Yeah.
They don't have to have an expert. You can do it with what we call lay testimony, lay people. So just like the family can get up there and be like, he's crazy, he's been to the doctor, he's on these medications. But usually, especially in higher stakes cases like murder or some sort of violent offense, then they really want to see a mental health expert.
Yeah, I know some people do it though just to get a lesser sentence,
Okay,
but
so
they're not
it's
actually.
Very,
incredibly
very hard.
Very few people actually get NGRI, which is not guilty by reason of insanity. It is a very, very tough standard to meet, especially in the state of Texas. So just by virtue of having a mental illness does not get you there. Here it's you have to have not known that conduct was wrong at the time you committed the offense. So very hard standard to meet. In fact, since I've been with you, 0. I've seen one. Haha. Yeah. I've seen a couple, but none that actually met that criteria. We had one in Oklahoma that did.
Yeah.
But it's a very, very hard
How
criteria.
would you meet that criteria? Like, if you have to prove that, what type of psychological thing would you have?
So I'll give you an example of a case that we had. Somebody who is paranoid schizophrenic, and they perceive somebody's threatening their life, right? That's not true. They may have a delusional system that they're being tracked and people are watching them and they're a threat to them, and then they kill that individual. Well, they kill them in self-defense in their mind,
Yeah.
right?
So by that, would they get sentenced at all, or would it be more to like a mental institution? Or?
So if you get if the jury, because ultimately the jury is going to make that decision, right? We don't make it. We say this is what we think, this is our opinion. Jury makes that determination. If they're found NGRI, they're headed to the state hospital for an indefinite amount of time. And that's what, Skyview in Texas?
Well, if it's a violent offense, it's Vernon.
Oh,
It's part of
Vernon, okay.
Texas State
Vernon.
Hospital in Vernon, and then they transition you to lesser restricted environments if they can over time.
But you can get out. Like Ronald Reagan, the guy who shot him, recently was let out.
Yeah, but that was like eons ago.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
before
You're
you
not
guys realize
usually
that.
discharged, but it's interesting
Years
because
and
you're
years.
not guilty, right? You're not guilty by reason of insanity, but you have to go to the state hospital. And oftentimes, other than for murders, you are gonna spend more time in the state hospital than if you had just taken a plea deal on your case. So it's not, so if people are trying to get out of it, they're not gonna get out of it. And so sometimes people will, we'll have people mess with us on competency, right? Like if they know that if they're found not competent, they get to go to the state hospital. And I will call them on it. I don't know if you do, but
Oh, yeah,
I'll call them on it
100%.
and be like, okay, here's what's gonna happen. If you wanna be found, incompetent, you're gonna wait. Our wait time right now to go to the state hospital is close to 2 years. Okay, you will wait 2 years,
In jail.
Then you'll go to the state hospital and you'll be there a while, and guess what? When you come back, where are you? Square one. So you
No
wanna,
credit for time served.
Why
right,
is it such a long wait for the hospital?
it's pathetic. The money,
There's no.
Because our
bed.
country
Yeah.
doesn't value mental health.
And
Yeah, there's-
Texas is like 50th.
we're like the worst in the state for mental health.
We're even
beds.
worse than in Mississippi. It's bad.
Yeah.
It is. But you'll see, cause I know, I think Andrea Yates. he
Yeah,
was
that's
on the-
another really high profile
And so you're
case.
talking about, if you look at some of the high profile ones, you're talking about a lot in a facility, an institution. So if you're using that to get out of running somebody over or something
Yeah.
like that, that's not a smart thing to do.
No,
You
and-
should just bleed and just, you know.
And most people
do your
figure
time.
that out once they talk to the attorneys, once they've met with one of us. The other thing is, the education you get and kind of the trajectory of mental illness. What does somebody who has schizophrenia, what does that kind of look like, right? Well, if they're telling me they see a little green men in the corner, I'm like, well, that's pretty inconsistent with paranoid schizophrenia. But we do get that, and it's like, okay, you're lying to us. So that's another kind of cool part. We will confront people. I don't have to pretend. So in neuropsychology, if you don't give good effort on these tests, they're not valid, right? If you don't try hard on a test, it doesn't tell me if have good processing speed or you have good language abilities if you're just not trying. So I get to call them out. When I was in the clinic, you just kind of work your way. The doctor was always, oh, just keep trying. Now, in the jail, I'm like, okay, well, clearly you don't want to do this today. Whatever's getting in the way of you performing your best, that's fine. We'll try it another day. I like that part because I really, really don't like to try to be patient when I know they're not trying. I'm just like, you are wasting my time. So.
So speak a little bit about how do y'all get paid? I know, I mean, that's a reality.
Because we
It's
don't take
reality.
it's not insurance, right?
Mhm.
Not much of our work is retained, some.
It's private. So what happens is, in most of our cases, either if the defendant can pay, right, for an attorney, then usually we get paid that way. Otherwise, for most people, right, they are appointed an attorney because they don't have the money, right? Like that's a right that you're afforded in our country. And so the attorney goes to the judge and says, Judge, we need to get these doctors to do an evaluation. So will you approve funding? Will the court pay for it because the defendant doesn't have money and the lawyer doesn't just pay for it? And so usually it's coming from the counties and the states and that sort of thing. So funding is guaranteed by the courts for the most part. But no, we don't do any third-party billing as far as insurance. There's no Medicare, Medicaid, none of that. It's just
It's billable hours, though.
Right.
Much like an attorney would have billable hours, that's what we do. And if we get a retainer in a private pay case, we work off that retainer until it's exhausted, and then it's like, okay, well, more money for us to continue.
And that's why you'll see in a lot of times small towns, if there's a murder case, especially if it's capital murder, they'll forego the death penalty because they don't have the funds.
the money. Yeah.
Because
Or-
it's very expensive to
It's-
try capital cases.
Yeah, the upfront cost is close to $1 million and over. People always think that the majority of the money in death penalty cases comes from keeping them in prison, and that's not the case. It's all of us experts that you have to hire, and when there's 5 of us on this side, there's gotta be 8 on that side, and there has to be a huge trial, and these are weeks and weeks and weeks. So out here, are we in Hunt County? out
Hunt
here?
County.
Okay, yeah, so there's occasionally a death penalty case
Yeah.
happening, but.
Smith County, we get some.
Yeah, Smith County
So like
lots.
Tyler.
But yeah, usually the upfront cost is too much for
Yeah.
small counties.
Yeah.
And it's going more in the direction, and I think society is leaning more on the side of abolishing the death penalty. And you've seen that certainly happen in the northern states. We down here in the south, we're not getting
Texas.
rid of it anytime soon. You'll have to pry,
Right out of cold dead
yeah,
hands.
exactly right, so.
And if you look at if you do any research into the criminal justice, like, because I do study abroad in Costa Rica, they don't have jury trials.
Yeah.
It's all done
Yeah,
before a
I do
judge.
have a question about that.
Yeah.
I've never really thought about that before, but like that seems
About
like
like
maybe not a good idea.
What, a
What?
trial by jury?
Yeah, because
Well, you
it's
got-
very subject. I mean, it's random people,
Subjective
It's
regardless.
supposed to be your
though.
peers.
It's supposed to be your peers.
But at the same time, I mean, like.
But if you have a not bias, if you have, there are some, at least one federal judge on the bench right now that I can think of who is incredibly punitive. And his sentences, he could kind of care less what you bring to the table. Like,
Yeah.
oh, you were traumatized as a kid, your parents beat you, you were abandoned. so sorry, I hate that for you, but here's your max sentence for that
Yeah.
ag robbery. In that case, I would have to argue that probably my peers might be better.
Yeah. At least you have 12, right? Like, somebody could hang out.
Hopefully
with-
somebody's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, no, I'm not gonna go with that max sentence for that person, so.
But what we see most of the time is that this is not a jury of the peers,
Yeah, not even a
right?
little
I mean,
bit.
you look at the defendant and you look at the peers, and they don't look anything alike, they're not from the same places.
Education's different.
Yeah, I mean, it's just,
Right.
it's really kind of sad. It's really sad.
But most people also don't wanna serve on juries, right? Like, nobody wants to, you get what, $12 a day or something
6
obnoxious?
for parking or something?
Yeah, I mean, you're not being compensated for it, and then you're also taking time out of your day, you might have childcare issues, you may have a job, you know. So
Yeah,
it's
we're-
not like a
yeah.
glorious job to have,
Yeah.
but.
Also in high-profile cases or individuals who have a lot of money, the lawyers can actually hire experts to determine what the panel should look like.
Yeah.
And they do.
And they do. They can hire a lawyer, and the lawyer will then have a profile of who they want to have on that
On the
jury.
I feel like
They
is it
can't
like
pick
Dr.
who's
Phil?
on there, but they
Yeah,
can
Dr.
pick who
Phil,
they
yeah.
don't want on there.
Yeah.
They get strikes. They can't say, I want this person, but they can say, I don't want this person.
And that's why
Yeah.
jury selection can take so
Yeah.
long.
Aren't you required to serve like as a jury member like once a year or something?
You're not, if you get a summons, you have to respond to it, but there are
in the mail.
so many exemptions, like if you're in college, you're exempt, if you have kids under X number, like
Under 9, I
years,
think, or-
you're exempt. They never want me, I tried once, they were like, you did what? No, we're good.
Yeah.
My family gets struck, my dad has been struck from several juries, they're like, nope, out.
Yeah,
it's
like my
funny,
mom
the
got
first
called
ti-
in.
Yeah, the first time I didn't have an exemption, because I had children, I had it in school and
Yeah.
everything. The first time I had to go, I didn't have an exemption. I was working as a social worker, it was in my first job. They're like, you're fine, you won't get picked. Hello,
Yeah.
first one,
Yeah.
picked.
Yeah.
My dad's like, so my daughter was a cop, I have, my daughter-in-law's a forensic psychologist, and she is, and then they're like, you're done, thanks for coming down.
And if it's in like a small town, and like my mom was called in once, and she's like, "Oh, do you know this lawyer?" And she'd be like, "Yeah, he goes to my church." Okay, you're not. Getting
Yeah,
paid.
like it's super
But
fun.
that's-
What small town? Like
Mount Vernon.
Oh, okay.
You know where Mount Vernon is?
Yes, because I grew up in Hallsville.
Where?
Hallsville,
Yeah. Okay.
and I went to school, I did my undergraduate and my master's at UT Tyler.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. My niece graduated from here a year or two
Down
ago.
our website.
What was her name?
Andrea Galusha.
If they have other questions.
She was like into equestrian stuff.
And they
Okay.
Apparently there's like an equestrian team here, I didn't know either.
They actually do. They pay attention to details. They come up with some good stuff. So, any other questions before y'all head out to your next class?
How do you get started? Like, how do you just go to like having your own practice? Did you have to?
Yeah, you join up with somebody who already has a practice, and then you build that practice. Lawyers don't just wanna call anybody, they're not gonna look you up in the phone book, they want to know who you are and know about you.
Networking.
Yeah, it's absolutely networking.
It's starting with somebody established.
Our contact information is on, you'll have the website, but it's also on those pens. We are happy if anybody wants to come out and talk to us, Zoom or on the phone or whatever, just to get more details. We do this all the time because we think we have the coolest jobs in the world, and so other people kind of sense that about us, and so if you have other questions, feel free to reach out to
Yeah.
us.
One quick thing before they go, if you went back to yourself as a freshman, what would you tell yourself? Don't be afraid, you shouldn't have taken so long, you should have done this. What would you tell you, now, what would you tell yourself?
Explore careers.
Eva?
Explore different
Do
careers.
be last.
I mean, I think it's the same thing, yeah, just take risks, do things that you might not normally do, take classes.
Yeah.
No, mine's like, I don't know, self-care. Like, do what you gotta do, but like take care of yourself and like make connections. I think I was so focused on getting the best grades and all the trajectory that I like forgot of the importance of just like human connection. So I would say make some connections and have fun while
Shout
you
out-
pursue. You can pursue your dreams and have fun. That's my
Yes.
point. There it is.
And shadow people, right? If there's a career path you're interested in, make that connection. Hey, can I shadow you for a day? Can I sit down and talk to you? Explore all these different things, because the person you are today, I promise you in 5 or 6 years, it will be different. You will change.
Yeah, we talked about our future self, they've
Yeah.
already talked
I'm
to our
telling you.
future self, so.
I would have been an engineer.
What town are y'all based in?
We're in Dallas.
Dallas.
Yeah.
So again, reach out. We love to talk
Yeah,
about
we
our
can shout
job.
y'all.
Yeah.
Yep.
Alright,
Good luck.
thank y'all.
Thank you. Yeah, good luck.
We
Yeah, that was my favorite one yet.